Hello everyone, I'm Rich Lamont. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Today's video is by a subscriber request. I'm going to discuss some flosses, the different kinds of flosses and how to tie them in, and proper techniques for wrapping them to get yourselves better, smoother, much nicer looking floss bodies. So as you can see, I've got a hook here that's already prepped with an underbody, and I've got some tinsel tied in for the tip. First I want to talk about Danville floss. Danville rayon floss. A little closer. This is used quite a bit with a lot of different flies. It comes in a variety of different colors. There's a huge selection of colors out there. When you get it, it comes as a 4-strand. So what that means, if you're not familiar with it, is that when you take it off of the spool, this one I believe I've already used 3 of the 4, well, up to a certain length. When you take it off the spool, there's going to be more than 1 strand. It's going to be 4 strands. As you can see, hang on, let me pull it out a little longer. And you'll see I'll get to the 4th strand here in a moment. Right there. Okay. So there's our 4 strands. And the inconvenient part about this is that if you want to use a single strand, you got to pull off 4 strands in the length that you want. In which case this is about, I've got about 2 feet of this pulled off. And to get to that 1 strand, you'll pull off all that you need. Cut off the one, and then you got to wrap up the rest. It's inconvenient. However, you know, it's kind of one of those things that, you know, we kind of deal with as fly tiers. There are things that are a little bit simpler to deal with. This isn't a terrible thing, but it is a little less convenient than, say, a single strand floss, which I'll show you some of those in just a moment. But Danville's 4-strand, it's really not bad. I used it for years. I tied a lot of classic salmon flies with it for years. And if you do it right, you can make it look really good. The color's not quite as vibrant as actual silk, but it works quite well. So first, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to prep this really quick. So when you're tying your floss, in, especially like your tip and tag, let's bring this back just a little bit more. I'm not actually tying a fly. This is strictly for demonstration purposes, so proportions probably won't be 100% here. But when you're tying in your tip and your tag, you're gonna do, you know, 2, 3, maybe 4 wraps of tinsel, depending on the size of the fly, the pattern, etc. So let's just do 3. Okay, so you've got your tinsel, and you want to tie that off. Now there's a couple things you can do here. You can tie it off. Make sure you tie that off nice and tight and good. And then you can continue on up the shank and keep that tinsel underneath. You can see right there. You can get underneath the hook shank with it and tie off all the way up to where your butt's going to be. Now the problem with that is that that leaves that tinsel under there, which can create a bump, and in a display fly you're going to notice that. You can see that underneath the floss, especially if you're using silk. So one of the things you can do is you can kind of mash that down, and if you've used Unistretch or woolly nylon or something like that for the underbody, it is a little bit softer, so you can push that tinsel into that underbody a little bit, and you can kind of smooth that out, and that'll kind of give you a better reveal with your floss. Now the other way to do it is to clip it off. Tie it off maybe 2 or 3 good turns and then clip it. That's what we'll do here. We'll just clip this off and then continue to tie that up and make that look smooth. Now again, you're going to have that butt end, so just use your thumbnail and very gently press that into the underbody and flatten that out, and that should eliminate any kind of a lump right there when you tie in your floss. And then the last thing that you can do, which I'm sure many of you have seen in my videos, is to use your tinsel and do like a fancy little spiral pattern around the butt section, or around the tag section. You can see right here, I did it in that one. Patterns don't call for that. That's more of a style thing if you're just trying to be a little bit fancier, I guess. I like doing it, I just think it looks nice. But it's not a pattern thing. And that presents problems of its own, but that's for a different video. This is about the floss today. So that's nice and smooth. So now we can move up to where we want to tie in, and we'll do our rayon floss first. Now you'll notice that I'm using white thread. When you're dealing with flosses that are light in color, yellows, light blues, orange, pinks, anything that is a much lighter color, black thread will show through. So you want to use a white thread to prevent that from happening. Okay, so now we'll tie that in, and I'm using rayon, so my fingers aren't, I'm not concerned with roughing it up too bad, though that can happen. But for now I'm just going to wrap this barehanded. With actual silk floss, it's best to use gloves. I'll get into that in a moment though. But now here we are wrapping the rayon, and we're just going to do this touching turns. We're going to go back to the tip, and then we're going to come back forward, and we're going to go just a hair past where we tied in. Okay. Alright, now if you do look, I'm sure you can see, there's still a lump right here. So if you're gentle enough with your finger, with your thumbnail, you can go through and gently just compress that a little bit more, and you can still make that smooth. Or you can use an agate burnisher, go through and smooth that out from the back side so you can see. And the burnisher really does help quite a bit. That helps you get a nice smooth floss. And what that does is it just moves those fibers around very gently and kind of settles them into place. Okay. And then right where we tied in, we can go ahead and move our floss here, or the butt end anyways. And now we're ready to tie in our tail and our butt. And now when we tie in the tail, we can go back a little bit, back over what we just tied in. And when you tie your tail in, you want to make sure that you have a nice smooth flat spot here. If it's dipped down in here, your tail is going to pop up. If you use tinsel and that tinsel comes up too high, if you go back to my Baron video, the last fly that I did, you'll notice that that happened, where right here when I tied in, the tail popped up a little bit because the tinsel was in the way. So you always want to make sure you have a nice flat spot right there to tie your tail in. Remember, I'm not tying a fly. This is just for the video. Alright, so let's say we want to tie in our topping here. Alright, see how I just very quickly tied that in, and that has a nice angle off of it. It comes out of the section nicely, it doesn't lump up, it doesn't rise. And that's because we prepped the area properly. Okay. And we'll go back to our black ostrich turtle. That is not tied very tight at all. Oh. Alright, I need to get some wax on there. Well, you'd think I was actually tying a fly with this one. Going through all the steps. Okay. Okay, so now we've got the butt in. And you see at the top there, you've got that tailed stem. So if you're doing a floss body fly, you really want this to be as smooth as possible. So you can do two things. One, you can tie this in all the way up, which can leave quite the lump on top of the fly and can be somewhat uneven. You can clip it off right here, which, as you can see, it leaves not too much of a reveal. Not too much of a lump there, but there is one. I'm not sure if the camera's picking that up. There is a very slight lump there. So that's where underbody material comes into play. And you can grab a little bit of your woolly nylon underbody material. And I start it at the front. Even if I want just a little bit back there, I start it sort of up by the front a little bit, because when you tie it in, even this little piece here can create a lump under the floss. So we'll take that and we'll go all the way back, and we only need like a thin layer. and that should be enough to compensate for that lump. Okay, so now you've increased the thickness of the body just a little bit, which on some flies I don't mind. Some flies don't look too bad that way. Sometimes a thicker body fly looks kind of good. Especially if you're going to be doing a bigger fly with a lot of tinsel and floss work. Sometimes a thicker body looks great, having more room to play and add some things onto it. Okay. So we'll take that back to the front. Back up just a bit. You don't want to keep piling up too much by the eye, by the way. If you start piling up too much up here, then you wind up with problems with a big head, and when you wrap your hackle and stuff, it can become problematic. Now, when you tie that off, you always want to add just a very small drop of head cement to that spot, or super glue. I use head cement. It dries fast enough that I don't feel I need super glue, but I see guys that use super glue quite a bit, or Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails. Any of those will work just fine. Okay, so now you've got that in, and you want to tie in your tinsel. Which I lost. There it is. Okay. So you want to tie in your tinsel, and you want it to look good. With this kind of a hook, I've already kind of taken the taper out for the gut eye, so this is nice and flat, and I want to leave it that way. So instead of creating a lump, because if you tie this in like this, that's going to leave a lump there. You can tie this in all the way up to the front. And typically if you've got a little bit of a lump here from your gut, that works for filling that in. But in this instance, let's say that's not the case. Let's say it's just not a possibility. So what you do is you take your tinsel and you strip that outer sheathing off of it. And when you strip that outer sheathing off, you wind up with this silk core. It's nice and soft, it lays down flat, and that will not get in your way of your tinsel, or of your floss work. So you go ahead and you tie that in on the underside. And watch when you're tying it in though, because if you see, there's a little stray fiber, a little stray piece of tinsel right there. I want to make sure that all of those stray pieces are taken care of. None of those are exposed or showing. Then go ahead and tie that in. And then when you tie it in, you can also use your thumbnail to kind of flatten that down. And as you see, we've got a nice flat, smooth tie-in. Okay, so let's say that section of floss is yellow again, like for instance a green Highlander. I want to show you a couple things really quick here. So let's do this. I'm going to use some black thread. And I'm just going to use a 74 denier thread. The white that I'm using is 150. I don't have anything smaller in white at the moment. So what I want to do here is I'm going to tie this in by hand because I want to demonstrate what happens if you use black thread under yellow silk. So I'm just going to make a couple of weird turns just to have it under there. Okay. I know that was really ugly. So that's the Danville rayon 4-strand floss. Great to learn with, inexpensive, easy to find. The next one we'll start with, or we'll go to, is the Avail. This is the one from 54 Dean's, Dean Street. Sorry, I'm just getting over COVID, so bear with me here a little bit. Alright, so this one you can see is a little bit thicker. It's a little bit darker. I think there's slightly different shades of yellow between the two, to be honest. But it does seem a bit thicker. It is a bit darker. Now there's two ways that you can wrap this floss. This floss you can wrap by hand, which I'm going to do here in just a moment. Or you can put it on a bobbin and wrap it that way, which I will show you. I'll do that as well. And just spool it up really quick. I'll do the bobbin first because I can do that, and then I can unwrap it and still get it off of there pretty easily. So this one, just for the sake of keeping this on here, normally if I'm using the bobbin for floss, what I'll do is tie the floss in, run the regular thread to the front, whip finish, cut it off, so that way I don't have two bobbins that I'm dealing with. It's not so bad to do, but when I have the camera in front of me as well, it becomes a little difficult. Alright, so this one we can tie in kind of the same way we do with regular thread. Just overlap. I don't particularly care to do that. I'm going to do it up front just to get it in. Forward the section just to get it in. Typically you would tie it in though with thread. You would not tie it in this way. Okay. So with this, as I said, it is a little bit thicker and it will cover more, and as you can see, it's already covering up that black. You can see a little bit through it. You may not be able to, and the camera may not pick it up, but you can see a little bit of the black, but when I make that second pass, the black completely disappears on that second pass. And you can see what I'm doing by rocking it back and forth like this. That helps flatten it out, and it helps tighten it up a little bit, and helps get it into the little peaks and valleys in between the threads. I personally am a really big fan of this method. It works very, very well. It's very, very easy to do, and you can get a really nice result of that. I haven't burnished it yet, and you can already see how nice and flat and smooth that is. Let's move on a little. And the camera's a little on the fuzzy side, but as you can see, that's pretty smooth. There was no, it's not a situation you're going to run into, but I want to demonstrate. All right, so first, again with the Danville rayon. Now when you're doing body sections, There's two ways you can do it. You can tie in like we just did, which is just tying in at the end and then wrapping back with one strand like this. Or you can double it, where you make your strand a little bit longer than you would, and you take it and wrap it around your thread like this. And all you're doing is just folding it in half and using your tying thread to fold it. And now you have two strands to work with. So if you've got a longer bodied fly, you can do that, and you can have two strands to work with and flatten them out, and that works pretty well, especially with thinner flosses like the Danville rayon or Japanese embroidery silk, JEC, that as well. I'm going to do this here, single strand. Single strand takes a little longer, a little slower, but okay, so here we go. Whoa. Now first you want to do is you want to straighten your floss out. Most of these have some sort of a twist to them a little bit. They're not all of them are very twisted, but most of them have some sort of a twist to them from the making process. So you want to flatten that out, pull strands all the way down through, make sure everything's nice and clean and straight, and then start making your wraps. Now as you can see, that black is showing through. Go all the way back to the butt and then forward again. I may not have enough floss to finish this, but if you look carefully, I got it. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'll zoom in here in a moment so you can see that the black is still showing through, and when this gets wet, it's going to continue to show through. It'll probably show through even more. I'll just take a burnisher quick. And the burnisher has already broke a few fibers. And that's probably my fault. My hands are actually a little on the sweaty side. I didn't quite wrap that well enough. But my point wasn't for that, for this. So you can move in here just a little bit. Of course not. And you can see right through that yellow, and you can see that the black is definitely showing through that yellow. So we're going to pull that yellow back off of there. Okay, so now if we just take the burnisher and gently, with silk you got to be even more gentle, but if you can lay it smooth enough, most of the time you don't really need to burnish it. I think I better, yeah, there's a couple of rough spots. When you get an agate burnisher, pay attention to it, because this one being a stone, these little grooves in between these little stone lines, those little grooves can actually nick your floss, and I think that's what's happening here. So let's find a spot that doesn't. And you just go through and you smooth your floss out. But as you can see, where the tinsel got tied in, this thick, large silver tinsel, you can start a nice wrap. But there's no lumps, and where the tail went in, there's no lump there. Those are important things to pay attention to when you're tying in your materials and tying a display classic salmon fly. Fishing flies, as you know, I continue to say, the fish aren't going to care that much, so those things probably aren't as important, but I tell people that it's great practice to do it even on your fishing flies, so that way you stay in practice and you get better and better, because each time you do it, you do get a little bit better. You do notice things. You do instill habits into yourself. So by doing it on your fishing flies as well, you're going to make yourself a better fly tyer. I'm going to back this off and try to save this floss if I can. I see that it got nicked though. There is a spot in there that I'll have to tend with later. Pardon me. Okay, so that was the Avail. Now I'm going to do that by hand as well. Where did my gloves go? Okay. When you're doing silk, especially Japanese silk, the Avail is a little bit more forgiving. The Lagardin is a little bit more forgiving, but the Japanese silk is not. Japanese silk is extremely delicate, more so than anything else that I've worked with. So having a set of gloves to work with is paramount. I've been using nitrile gloves, the black like mechanics type gloves. They work great. I absolutely love using them. The downside is if you use them for a long time, your hands get sweaty and, you know, that kind of gets a little uncomfortable. So I went and I got myself a set of these, which are actual silk gloves. These are silk liners. I don't know how well they work. I've barely used them. I just ordered them and just received them. I think they were like 20 bucks. So if you're interested in getting a set of silk gloves, they're not expensive. You know, I thought they were going to be, you know, ridiculously expensive and it was going to be a problem, and they're not. Actually, they're easy to find and they were on my door pretty quick. So this is the same floss. This is the Avail. And I'm going to do this by hand. This is how I would wrap the floss by hand. Tie it in, and then I would run it all the way, run my thread all the way to the front of the fly. Now if you can see right here, there's a little bit of floss that's out of place. Those are the little things that you want to straighten out. You want to make sure that you go down through your floss, make sure there's no frays, any of these pieces that are like that, they should be either removed, snipped out, or stripped out. In this case here, that's what I'm going to do, is just run my fingers through it and pull it out the other end. And there you can see, now we're nice and smooth and ready to go. And we'll see how these gloves handle, or how the silk handles these gloves, or vice versa. Okay, the one thing I am noticing is that it's a little harder for me to twist the floss in my fingers to get it to flatten out. Like I said, they all do have a little bit of line twist in them. But so far, I'd say the gloves are comfortable. The floss slides through the gloves smoothly. It doesn't seem to be catching on any part of the gloves like it would on your fingertips, especially if you have working hands. Guys that are working outside, they get cold, chapped hands. If you don't have access to gloves, you don't have, and you don't have like mechanics gloves or anything, you can always go and use like an emery board or some really fine sandpaper and just sand down around your fingertips or any rough spots on your fingers. Okay, so first impressions, I like the gloves, they're comfortable. I don't like that I can't feel the floss, but I can get used to that. Okay. Tie that off. Snip away the excess. And then we've got, that's the one section of the body. And again, you can see down here on the underside, right here, there's no real lump from the tinsel. There's no lump from the tail topping. All things that you want when you're tying your fly. Alright, I'm happy with that. I like that. I'm going to leave it. Let's pretend we're moving right along. So the next floss that I want to talk about is the Lagardin. Take these gloves off real quick. Lagardin floss is thicker still. I do like it. It does have a nice, bright, vibrant color. It's very similar to the Avail. As you can see, it's many strings. There's, I don't know, 8 strands in there. So it is a little bit thicker. It can be broken down and thinned out to thinner strands. But let's go forward a little bit. And this is the same thing. This you can leave on the spool, and you can put it on a bobbin, and you can, you know, floss your body that way, or you can strip some off and do it by hand. I'm just going to do this by hand. I actually want to get a little bit of practice with these gloves. Kind of get used to them a little. So let's tie this in quick. Let's do this as if this was another fly. As this was a fly. 2-section body, typically we'd go to the middle. Some do a third and 2/3. Some have, you know, if this was like a green Highlander, for example, it would be yellow here, and then the rest would be either green floss or green seal's fur. But for the most part we would go right up to about here, which is where we would do our throat and our wing and all of that. Let's go to there. Now I will take this yellow back off. Oh, hold on just a minute, folks. Sorry about that. I had a pup with an upset stomach. So, I got the floss tied in. Just going to put on my silk gloves again. And we're going to wrap this up. So now, just as the Avail did, this would cover up black thread quite well. But the thing about LaGarden is, if you look, it's quite twisted. So that makes it a little bit harder to work with. So you really got to make sure that you untwist it and separate it. It's really nice silk, but I'll be honest, I don't use it very much. For the most part, I stick with the Avail and the JEC. With this, as you're tying it, you know, rocking it back and forth like this does help flatten it out. Does help spread it out some. But as you can see, it is quite a thick floss. So when you are building on this, it piles up rather quickly. So depending on the body size you're going for, this would probably be one of the best flosses to tie in at the rear and just work your way forward. Because if you're tying in, I just want to show you here. Alright, this is a double layer here of the Avail. This is a single layer of just the LaGarden. So I'm going to get a little bit closer so you can see the difference. But then I'm going to turn around and go back. Even flattened out, you can already see how much thicker that is. See, that creates a much, much thicker body. So for that reason is why I don't use it very much. But, you know, this is a multi-strand floss in a sense that you can actually, you can pull this apart, but I personally, it's a pain to do that. So let me remove this, but you can see how thick that is. You can see how nice it wraps. If you don't have an underbody, if you're not working with a fly that's got an underbody, but you want to have a little bit thicker of a buildup, that'll work. You can use that. For flies, though, that have already an underbody, that are a little on the thicker side, I would venture to say that, you know, take this floss, and if you're going to use LaGarden, either thin it out by removing some of the strands, divide it out, which I'll show you how really quick. I'll just take these gloves off again. Downside to the gloves, yeah, you got to take them on and off. So, looking at the LaGarden floss, it's twisted. Yeah, I'm sure you can see that. Yeah. So to divide it, you kind of come up towards the tip and untwist it in your fingers. Grab your dubbing needle and spread it apart like this, twist it, and then push together a little, and that'll kind of spread those fibers out. And then just take your dubbing needle and separate out some of them. And we split it in half. So we'll just take that and untwist with our other fingers. So it's starting to separate. Then you can take that and just follow that all the way down and slowly separate and pull them apart. There we are. I've thinned it out, and now I've got a much thinner strand. There's one. There's the other. Which again, I can thin out even further. So there is ways to thin it out and make it a much thinner floss. But for me, I mean, it kind of goes back to the same thing with the Danvilles. Actually, this is a little bit more of a bother to do, but you get more usage out of it by doing that. So that's up to you really, what you want to do with it. Up to you what kind of floss you'd like to use and the kind of processes you'd like to go through. If Lagarden is the only floss that's available to you readily, you know, definitely go for it, and you can strip it down. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can strip that down like that, you can divide it out, and you can get a lot of use out of it, but it's easier to go the other route and just have a single strand that you can tie right with. Okay, so next is the Japanese embroidery silk, JEC, and got some of that here. So Japanese silk comes on these spools like this. Usually a cardboard tube wrapped in plastic. Plastic is always there to protect it, so when you unwrap these, you want to make sure you wrap them back. You unwrap them carefully, and then wrap them back up again with the same plastic. Now I've taken some and I've put it onto a bobbin spool, as you can see here. Easiest way to do this, to spool it, is, I'm going to move the camera here for just a moment. You can see right here I've got, that's a spool of some green that I'm going to be using here later, but I just have an old vise that I set up here, and I just slide that on there, let that hang so that way I'm not touching it, and then you can take this end right here, wrap that around an empty spool, and then just use your hands to hand wind it very slowly and carefully so not to damage it. And that's how I transfer it over to the spool. It's quick, it's easy, and then you have it on a spool where you can put it into a bobbin, and it's very easy to use that way. I was doing that mostly because I didn't have gloves and I didn't want to damage the floss. So it's the same process. If you're doing it by hand, use the gloves. Very slowly, methodically wrap your floss. The gloves should help tremendously in keeping that floss protected. Or you can do it this way, which is with the bobbin. When tying it in, I always tie it in the same way. Then I'll let the bobbin hang, and I'll do a whip finish right here. That gets the bobbin out of the way. You don't have to fight with it. It's not so bad, especially with a midge bobbin, because it's nice and short. But if you're using a regular bobbin, it's a little bit longer. And with the camera right here, I just like to get it out of the way. So, with the Japanese embroidery silk, you can go through and very gently wrap. You can keep your floss nice and flat. I just really like this method, and it works very, very well with the JEC. You don't have to touch the floss, you don't have to worry about damaging it. And now if you look at this versus how thin the other flosses were, see? The other floss was wrapped on rather thin. This is, or rather thick rather. This is a little bit on the thinner side, as you can see. Even with the double layer, it's still not as thick as the Avail is. And if you also look, I'm hoping the camera can pick it up. Sorry, that's my little camera mount thing that creaks. If you look right here, that line in the floss is actually part of the gut eye. That's about where the gut eye ended. That's one of the strands. So I just wanted to point that out so you guys can see that anything that is underneath the floss is going to show. And yes, I did a very poor job of blending those bodies together, but that really wasn't what I was shooting for. So yeah, I wanted to show you guys that everything shows through. A lot of times though, when you're doing floss bodies, especially up by the eye, you know, there's a lot of distraction here. There's tinsel that's wrapped all the way up, and then you've got, most flies have a hackle that is wrapped all the way up. In the instance that you have a floss body fly that has either no hackle and then just a throat, a blue doctor or a silver doctor are those, but the silver doctor's, that's a tinsel body fly, but similar principle. You kind of want to take this gut eye all the way to the back, or blend it throughout the whole body so you don't have this right here. On a fly that's got hackle and everything up in front here, that is going to that's going to hide a lot of this. It's not going to be seen. Whereas, you know, like a blue doctor or something like that, that type of fly, this front section is going to be seen a lot more. So you want to try to blend that that gut all the way to the back underneath it, so that way you don't wind up getting this kind of an effect. Now, in the same breath though, the gut sub and gut, it's twisted. So when you tie it in all the way to the back, sometimes, especially with gut sub like monofilament, that twisting, that knotting that's created when you twist the sub, that actually will show through all the way to the back. So what you can do is, after you tie it in here, you can untwist it by hand, clip the ends so that way it's open, and then open it back up and untwist it by hand, and start cutting the individual pieces at different lengths all the way throughout down the fly, and at an angle similar to or parallel to the hook shank. That'll ensure that you get a much smoother underbody, and that you don't see so much of that gut. Alright, I want to undo this. And the last thing I want to show you is blending of two body segments. So let's say you're going to do yellow and red. Go. Okay, so if you're going to do a yellow and red double body, when you do your back, when you really actually want to feather that out a little bit, and you want to blend that, see right here there's a little bit of a rise there. This part of the body is a little bit thicker. You want to actually, when you wrap that back section, you want that to kind of taper off into the front a little bit. So that way when you do wrap, or when you do tie in your other color, you can wrap to that and then forward again. So you want to be able to overlap that rear segment just a little bit. I decided not to use the gloves. My hands are too sweaty. I don't want to get them filled up. I don't want to get the gloves all dirty yet. Not sure why I've got sweaty hands. Alright, so as I get close to this, I want to make sure that I can overlap it, but thinly. And then you also want to make sure, if you've got a rotary vise, this is a good time to actually use it and make sure that you cover all the white. All the underbody, you overlap that rear segment properly. That'll give you a nice, clean reveal or transition. And then again, this front section also, you want to have a somewhat of a taper. You want that to taper back down to the hook point, so that way by the time you get up there, you don't have a huge step down to work with your throat and your hackle and okay. So that would be a poorly blended body. Very poorly. I didn't have the proper taper from the rear to the front, so as you can see there's a bit of a rise right here. It's a little bit of a bump. Then a lot of times, you know, you can You also have your tinsel, which most cases the tinsel will cross right over like that. So if you've got a tinsel point that crosses over, you could also do that with your floss, like this. Alright, so this is going to have an angle forward on it. So you kind of do something like that. And make sure they don't separate though. The strands are starting to separate just a hair. And then you can wrap the tinsel. Have your third wrap and blend in nicely, and you have a perfect switch from yellow to red in that instance. And most of this red floss here is going to have to go. It's been frayed. So, that was kind of a quick rundown on the different types of flosses. Those are just the ones that I have, the JEC, the Avail, Lagarton, and the Danville rayon. Those are the only ones that I've got. There are other ones out there, but these are the ones that I think are really the best. The Japanese embroidery being the number one. Avail would be my second choice. Then the Lagarton would, and then of course the rayon. So hopefully this video, guys, helped you out and helps you kind of learn a bit more about your bodies. Hopefully you guys can take something from that and start laying down better flies and you know, have some better results with it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, think about subscribing. You know, I'm going to have some more stuff out coming up. I always have stuff out coming out just about every week. I have new flies that come out every week, and I take requests. So, you know, if there's a fly that you'd like to see tied, leave it in the comments. Let me know. I'd be happy to get to it and make that a part of the show. With that being said, I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.